Hello everyone, welcome to part 1 of making Pong and Godot. Pong is one of the earliest arcade games. It features 2 paddles and a ball, where the goal is to score the ball on the opposite side. Score enough points? Winner winner. The simplicity of Pong makes it a great way to get started developing games in the Godot engine. In this video, we'll be doing some initial project setup and configuring our paddle size and collision shape. We'll see how to do this both manually and through code. Let's get started. Here I am in an empty Godot project. I always like to start out by creating a basic Node 2D as the root of our main scene. So let's click on the plus icon or press Ctrl A, Node 2D, click Enter to create the node, and there we have it. Let's rename our Node 2D to be main. Next, we can do some project organization early on by creating a scenes folder. And then within that scenes folder, we can create another folder, call that main, and then we can save our scene there. Now when we click on the run button, Godot will ask us if we want to make this our current scene, and we do, so select current, and there's our game window. So I like developing at a base resolution of 1920 by 1080 because it's the most common primary display and tends to scale nicely. This window is not currently at 1920 by 1080, but we can fix that. Let's go on up to Project, Project Settings, Window, and then we can adjust our viewport width, and we can adjust our viewport height. Now, when we rerun the scene, we'll have our window at 1920 by 1080. Awesome. But we have this dull gray color that I really don't like, and I want to change this to look more like Pong. And we can do that by modifying our project's default clear color. To do this, we again go into Project, Project Settings, go under Rendering, and click on Environment, and then we have Default Clear Color. Adjusting the default clear color will also change how our scene looks in the editor. It is basically the color that fills the empty space in our viewport. We could just go with a simple black, but that's kind of boring. There's a black and white color palette I like quite a lot. This 1-bit monitor glow palette, it just gives more of a cozy vibe and cozy feel to just traditional black and white. Let's go ahead, let's copy this hex value, and back in Godot, we can select our default clear color, paste in the hex value, and click Enter. And now when we run the scene again, we'll see our updated clear color. Now, let's go ahead and make our paddles. We'll start by creating a new scene, as well as creating a new folder, which we'll just call paddle. And then for our root node, let's go ahead and select other node. And since our paddle is going to have to collide with the ball, we can go ahead and choose an area 2D node. It doesn't have to be an area 2D node, but that's what we'll go with. Rename our area 2D node to be paddle. Cool. Now let's go ahead and save our scene, and we can save it under this new paddle folder that we just created. Now Godot is giving us this warning message about our area 2D node not having a collision shape 2D. We can go ahead and add that by pressing Ctrl A, collision shape 2D, press Enter, and we have another warning message from Godot about our collision shape 2D node needing a shape resource. We can add a collision shape by going to the shape property, and then I want the shape to be a rectangle shape 2D. And if we zoom in, we can see our collision shape. Cool. We can adjust the size of this later. Now let's add some art for our paddle. We'll click on the root node, and we could make it a sprite 2D node, but we can save on importing any textures by just making this a line 2D. I'll click Enter, and we can form our line by going over to the points and increasing the size to 2. And then for the second Y value, we just set it to whatever we want our paddle height to be. I think 80 is a pretty good height, but feel free to make it whatever you want it to be. Now we can adjust the collision shape for our paddle. Let's select our collision node, zoom in a little bit, and then we can drag our shape to how we want it to be. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I like to give collision boxes sometimes a little bit of a buffer, just so we can be a little bit more friendly to the player. Now let's save our scene, and then add it to the main scene. We'll switch over, and I'll just drag this paddle to somewhere in the viewport for the main scene. We'll just put it somewhere in the middle there. Now we can run our project, and we'll see our paddle on the screen. Awesome. One problem though that we have is if we want to change our paddle size, we'll have to manually adjust those values all over again. Worse yet, if something were to happen to our paddle scene, we would lose all of our hard work. While the editor is nice for initial setup and debugging, it'd be nice if we had those values configured in code. Luckily, we can do that. Let's go back to our paddle scene and add a script to our root node. We'll name it paddle.gd and we'll save it in our paddle folder. Now in the ready function, let's create a variable, call it line2d, and it'll be of type line2d, and we'll set it equal to our line2d node. Let's clear any points that were configured in the editor by calling line2d.clearPoints. And then we'll want to add a start and an end point. We can do that by making two calls to line2d.addPoint. We can copy this, paste it, and we'll want our first point to just start at vector2.0. And we'll want our second point to start at an x value of 0 and a y value of our height, which we said was 80. Now, in programming, it's a good idea to avoid what we call magic numbers. These are numbers that just sit around the code without any clear meaning. Right now, we would say that 80 is a magic number. We can fix this by storing it in a constant. We can define this constant at the top. We'll say const and give it a variable name, which I'll call height, which is of type int. And then we'll set it equal to 80. Now in our code, we can come down here and replace 80 with our constant, and that is much more readable. Next, we'll also want to set our width. So we'll call line2d.width, and then we'll make it equal to 10, which is the default width of any line2d. Again, remember no magic numbers here. So we'll go up, we'll say const width int equals 10, and then replace this down here with width. Cool. Now let's set the shape of our collision 2D node. We'll start by creating a new variable called collision shape 2D, which is of type collision shape 2D equal to our collision shape 2D node. And we'll want to set the shape of our collision shape 2D. We can do this by creating a new shape. We'll call it var shape. This will be of type rectangle shape 2D. Set this equal to rectangle shape 2D dot new. And then we'll set shape dot size equal to vector2, the width and the height of our paddle plus some collision buffer, which we'll say is 3. And then we'll move this collision buffer again to be a constant. So we'll say const paddle collision buffer int equals 3. Place the +3 with the paddle collision buffer. Finally, we'll want to set our collision shape 2D's shape to be this new shape, which we can do by doing collision shape 2D dot shape equals shape. One last thing we'll also need to do is center our collision shape 2D node. If our collision shape 2D node has a transform of 0, 0, you can see that half of the collision box will be off the paddle. In our code, we'll need to set the node's y position to be half of our collision shape's height. We can do that by setting collision shape 2D dot position equal to vector2, 0, then height divided by 2. Now our ready function is looking a little lengthy here. I would like to break these two pieces of logic into their own helper functions, just to help improve the code readability a little bit. So we can create a function configure line 2D, give it empty parentheses, and we'll have it return void. And then we can just copy our code here, and we can paste it under this function. Then we'll do the same for our collision shape 2D. We'll make a function configure collision shape 2D, void, and again, copy, and then paste. And then we'll just call these two functions in our ready function. And then configure. Awesome. And to make sure our collisions are set properly, we can go up to the top here under debug, and we can click visible collision shapes. And now while we're in here, we can also set the color of our line 2D node to match our color palette that we chose earlier. So we'll call line2d.default color. And then we'll just set that equal to our color, which I have the values right here. So I'll just go ahead and paste it in. And then we can just add a little comment here as well, just to describe what the color is. So we can just say 1-bit monitor glow palette white color. And that should do it. So let's go ahead and make sure our scene and our script are saved. And then when we run our project again, everything is all messed up. That's because I forgot to attach this script to the paddle node. That would be helpful. So go up to our paddle, hit plus, and then we'll add this paddle script, hit load. Now we can run our scene, and voila. We still see our paddle here, but this time its visuals and collision shape are controlled through code. To emphasize this, we can go back in the editor and change our paddle height to say something like 400, so it'd be an obvious difference. And then when we run the game, we see that it gets overwritten. Nice. Instead of modifying everything manually in the editor whenever we want to change the paddle size, we only need to change the width and the height in our code, and everything else is automatically taken care of. And that should do it for this video. I'll leave you with our question for the day. Seeing as Pong was one of the earliest video games ever made, share the first video game you remember playing. Mine was a Scooby-Doo game on the Nintendo 64. My dad and I were so bad at it, we had to use a cheat code, and even then we still struggled. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.